Hi, everyone. My name's Kelly Scott Reed, and this is a word. Today, we're here with Cassie Premo Steele. Welcome, Cassie.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here with you.
So happy to have you. And before we begin, let's just take a moment to talk about you. Give us a little background on yourself, who you are, where you're from.
Okay, great. I was born in Detroit and I grew up in Minnesota and Washington, D.C. So I consider myself a native Midwesterner. But after high school in D.C., I headed south and I did college at the University of Virginia, a master's at the University of South Carolina, and a PhD at Emory in Atlanta. And what I studied was trauma and how literature helps us heal from individual and collective trauma. And particularly the poetry of multicultural American women gives us a vision of healing from that trauma. So, all of my work, all of my books, much of my poetry, my scholarship has kind of this trauma healing and literature uh, connection. And I really was born wanting to be a writer. I tell people the funny story that when I was 8, I was keeping a regular journal and I would number them so that biographers would know if one went missing.
Oh, I love that you had that level of like, this is what I'm going to do. Get
Yeah,
used to me.
exactly. Exactly. My mother was a philosopher, a philosophy professor, and then later an administrator, and she worked at the NEH in Washington, D.C. So she really raised my sister and me with the sense that higher education was essential for women and that we could do anything we put our minds to. So it was very empowering.
Kind of leads me to your amazing book, Beaver Girl. I had asked you to send it to me so that I could read. Yes, thank you. Please plug it. Absolutely. First of all, the coolest idea. I would love to know because of you have so many themes running through survival being one, environmental issues, resilience. Did you start with the theme in mind, or were the themes coming up through the story that you were telling?
There were two moments of inspiration. And the most personal moment was that during the pandemic, our daughter was doing college from home and she was 20 in 2020. And I saw how devastating this was for that generation. I saw how, at a time when their brains were supposed to, um, you know, want them out of the house and with their friends. They were really isolated and, not even able to make jokes in the classroom anymore because you can't really make jokes in a Zoom chat. And it was scary for me. The other scary thing was that I also had long COVID very early. Our daughter was with her dad in New York in March of 2020. So when everything shut down, they went to get her computer and some books and things from her college in Philadelphia, then headed back to South Carolina. And my wife and I got sick probably about 5 days after she got home. So the long COVID started in the summer of 2020. And the personal kind of combination of my worries about her and that generation, my worries about myself and my own mortality were really the personal inspirations for the book. And then the environmental aspect of it came in October of 2021. I was listening to an interview with Emily Fairfax, who is a geologist who was in California at the time. And if you remember, during that time, we weren't only dealing with all kinds of political and health crises, but there were wildfires all over the
Mhm,
West. And
mhm,
so she couldn't do her regular research as a geologist. So she started sending up drones into places in the West that had been completely devastated by wildfires. And what she discovered was that where there was a little beaver family, there was still a green riparian Eden there supporting all of life. And we know that beavers help mitigate against flood and drought, but this was really kind of a watershed moment in
mhm,
beaver research. And I was sitting here on this couch next to my dog, Lenny Bruce, listening to Science Friday on October 21st, 2021. And I said to him, Len, that's my next book. And then what was amazing is the next day was Saturday. So I took him on our little 2 mile walk around the neighborhood. And we came upon this pond that we had passed by, almost every day for 9 years. There was evidence of beavers on the edge of the pond, very fresh markings in these cedar trees that were growing out of the water. And it just really was this moment like, okay, this is meant to be. And so my next step was to reach out to Emily Fairfax, Beaver scholars, writers who knew all about this, because I'm not a science girl. I barely made it through, rocks for
mhm.
jocks in college, and I can't do that at all. So it was a challenge for me, but I had this larger collective mission that here's a story that could give us hope. Here's
Mhm.
a story that there are climate change heroes already here. And so Livia kind of came from what my daughter was going through at the time and my worst fears for her. Um, the moms in the story are partially based on my wife and me. I wanted to show what a lesbian family looked like
Mhm,
and kind of normalize that.
mhm,
Um, and then, there's all kinds of other themes, like violence and
mhm.
isolation and healing and all of that.
So my son is exactly the same age as your daughter, and he came
Wow.
like born in 2000.
She was
So
December 20th, 1999.
yeah, he was November 3rd, 2000. So they're very close.
Yeah.
And I was surprised by the emotional toll
Yeah.
it took. And of course, reading your character, is it Livia or Livia?
Livy. For
Okay,
the
because
it's
Liv
live because I wanted her name to have the word live in it.
got it. So my aunt is Aunt Livia, so that's why I always
Ah,
say Livia. But that character reminded me of myself way back when I was 20 years old. So it was like some of the things that happened even to her. And I'm going, oh my gosh, so it really hit home. Did you have a character in particular when you were writing that was more difficult for you to write than the others? I mean, obviously writing in an animal's voice
yes.
had to be a
Yes.
challenge, but
Yeah.
you did a great job.
Well, I would say my dog Lenny Bruce helped me a lot with the animals. He's a really good coworker. And we would go for long walks during the pandemic, go to different state parks and hike and just kind of I thought about if he could speak to me, how would he speak to me? And then I used the same techniques that writers always do in creating a character in knowing their history and allowing you to see their relationship with their family members. But the one character that I really wanted to get right was Grayson. And so he, not to give too much away, but becomes important in Livia's life. And I wanted to not leave boys and men out of the story. I wanted to show that people who in our town, you would say, are from the other side of the river, more rural, more working class, more non-college educated. I wanted those people to feel included in the story. And so I specifically modeled him after young men that I know here in South Carolina who are just really good people and care about their families and maybe have some specific ideas about gender and what's right and wrong in the world. And yet he's able to help and teach Livia a lot because of the resilience that his mostly rural farm-based family taught him.
I felt there was a kindness to that character and a safety in the character,
Mhm.
which I really thought was great because you don't, you can have good guys and bad guys and people can be all at once,
Yeah,
both. But that was definitely noticed that there was a kindness and a good heart in the
right.
character.
Yeah.
Did you have a component about writing Beaver Girl that surprised you? Anything that came out of that you weren't expecting?
I think that there was a moment, and I think it's about halfway through the novel, where she's mourning the loss of her family. And I had kind of written the through line of the sadness and mourning, but it struck me that she was also really enraged that any of this had happened at all. And why did her mother have to die? And why did her sister have to die? And what the fuck did humans do to have her be one of the few surviving humans? And so there's a scene where she dives into the pond to really scream in the middle of the night and release that rage. uh and it was actually quite empowering for me because most of my life I've tried to be really nice, and that scene taught me that there's great power in anger.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think makes a great story? So when you're telling the story, which is a great story, what do you think makes one great?
There's a little bit of, for me, a page turner quality to a good story. I want to know what happens next. So you want to have conflict and resolution and the characters getting into dilemmas. Chap in his, very first scene wants to know why there are no birds song at sunset anymore. Um, and so there's a bit of fear, I think, in good stories and anticipation of what will happen. But I also think that, as you said before, there are good guys and bad guys, and the best people in books show both. And I think both Chap and Livia, as the two narrators, are also very flawed. They've they have fears, they have been through things that they're not proud of. And I think that makes them really relatable.
So so a relatable character, and we were talking. Another writer and I were talking about that recently about this. I have to have a good character. If the story can be there, but if I can't feel connected to something, even the bad guys. I particularly like the bad guys. I love a flawed character that makes it so much more real.
Mhm.
So that's just interesting. Now, do you, how do I say it? Do you write with your ending in mind, or you let the story unfold for you?
This was actually Nano, a national novel writing novel. So I wrote it in November of 2021. And this is the second novel that I have written that way. The first one was called The Resistors, and it was about detention centers and a fascist dictator president. And a young Native American girl who decides she wants to kill the president because her mother has been taken to a detention center for re-education as a real American. So in both cases, I did a lot of outlining before I started writing so that I knew when I woke up each morning, weekday morning in November, I knew what scene I was writing and I knew what my word count goal for that day was. And so when I'm in a writing rhythm like that, I like to get up really early. 4 o'clock is good for me. 3 or 3:30 is also good. I started this when my daughter was little. It was a way for me to have the quiet and know that I wouldn't be interrupted. So I write until dawn and I give myself a goal, a scene goal, and a word count goal that I head toward. And when I'm done, I'm done. One of the things in as a writing coach that I have taught people over the years is not to do too much. Have a goal for yourself and then shut the file, shut the computer, go have a life, go make some money and take care of yourself and your family and get something to eat. Go for a
Yeah.
walk. Because I do think sometimes people think if I'm going to be a writer, I have to be in front of this computer for 8 hours a day. And the brain just doesn't like that. So you end up playing all the time and, messing around on the internet and then feeling like you never got anything done. So time boxing it and saying, here's my goal. I'm going to hit the goal and then I'm going to move on. I have found to be a really good strategy.
That is a great strategy. It's one of the reasons I love a prompt. Like if a magazine, a lit mag goes, "Hey, we're writing about this," I am all about it. I can
Yeah.
do it. It puts parameters. My ADHD will go crazy. I can't just sit and write. I
Yeah.
have to have some form of a parameter to get me to
Yes.
even sit.
Yes.
That's great advice. That's great advice.
I think
What
especially, because we're still in the crisis, whether it's the after effects of the pandemic, political strife, all of the environmental things that are economically, I think a lot of people are feeling anxiety. And one of the things that I said to my wife, and this is why I love her so much, because after I said it, she wrote it down on a little post-it note, and I have it taped right next to me where I write. So what I said to her is, form matters in times of crisis.
Oh, I love that. I
So,
love that.
what form allows us to have a sense of safety and structure and stability. And so, the prompts that you were talking about, or a time limit on what we're writing, or starting first with the form of what we're doing, all of those things can be really helpful to allow us to dive very deep, knowing that we'll come back up
Mhm,
together, kind
mhm,
of not going into a really emotive, you know, recursive state where we're just, digging our heels in the mud all the time.
mhm.
But figure out your form as a writer, go into it and come back up.
What's the most meaningful criticism that you've received as a writer?
For this book, I had a hard time um, convincing anyone that animals had a voice. And it wasn't until I sent it to Sebastian at Outcast Press, and he wrote back immediately and said he'd read the first 3 chapters 3 times and he was fascinated and sent the whole thing, that I found someone to believe in the fact that nature has a voice. It was really interesting to me, particularly when I was shopping around for agents in New York City and, the big name places, that they said nobody wants an animal character, nobody wants an animal to talk. And I thought to myself, that's how we got into this.
Oh,
You all
yeah.
think
Sorry,
that
that
is,
was an aha moment.
yeah, that, Right now, I can literally see seven cardinals, which are like my ancestors, my Irish ancestors come to me as cardinals. They're in the tree right there. You know, they know what I'm doing in here. Especially during the pandemic, I think a lot of people stayed home, got to know the creatures in their area. We are on this earth together,
Yeah.
and we're not the only creatures. And we literally can't live without the planet. So it has to have a voice. And I think the more people who kind of open to that, I'm hoping that Beaver Girl allows people to open to that possibility, the more we can think of collective solutions where, the beaver community and the builders want to work together for good solutions.
It's funny you said that. My husband and I actually noticed, we live kind of in the woodsy area, that all of a sudden the animals were out again, where they had kind of disappeared. So during the pandemic, when everyone was at home and in New York, no one was going anywhere, everything was pretty shut down for a while. Um, we look out our backyard and there's just birds singing and there's hawks and there's owls. And we're going, wait a minute, where have these been? And it's like the streets were quiet. There was no sounds of motorcycles driving up and down the street.
Yeah.
Like it was a much quieter, even though we're in a quiet area, even more quiet, which was kind of awesome. And of course, we have a lot of hiking spots, and I just spent so much time
Mhm.
outside, and it in this felt much more connected.
Yeah.
But
One
that
of
was
my
an aha
best
moment.
writer friends, Sunita Durandar, is a writer in California. And during the pandemic, she was living in Oakland and taking a walk, and there was a deer walking down the street in Oakland. So there you go.
Yeah,
They're
yeah,
there. They're there. They're watching us. They're waiting. I
that's
do feel
amazing.
hopeful. I do feel like um I mean, what else can you be but hopeful? I mean,
Right.
either we start to work together to kind of turn things around and make this both, economically and environmentally sustainable for all life on the planet, or we won't be here.
Mm-hmm.
Really working together is the only option, unless we
Mm-hmm.
just want to throw up our hands and say it's over. But I don't think writers, we deal with the dark side really well, but we don't want it to really be, a tragedy in the end.
I always say that when I write and when I see like written word in plays, movies, it's our way of working out the dark stuff, almost like a trial run. What could we do different? How do we work
Mhm.
this out? Like when you write it out, you're processing the possibilities and it just helps you see different angles in a more
Yeah,
of a creative way with creative solutions. Almost like everything you see written becomes real. Like
yeah,
in one way, or it gives you the idea you can venture in those directions safely for a while
yeah,
and see the outcomes. Now I
yeah.
always have one last question that I ask
Okay.
everybody. Describe a time in your life when you realized that language had power.
There are many, but since we're talking about the difference between tragedy and happy endings, I will give you a story that has both, which was the day that I realized after a 16-year marriage to a man that I'm gay. And we went for a walk, and I said those three words on the walk. And with those three words, my entire life changed. His did as well. Endings are not easy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it was as if I had not been wearing glasses my whole life and kind of seeing things halfway. And with those three words, I put on glasses and everything was clear.
Well, that's really beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing all of your honesty and your experience with us. I am so excited and happy to have been able to meet you and talk to you. And Steve Passy kind of got us together. Thank you, Steve. But also, I just wanted you to plug your work. Where can we find it? How do people get in touch with you?
Sure. So the book is Beaver Girl. It is a joint collaboration between Outcast and Anxiety Presses. It's available online wherever books are sold. You can also check out my website, which is cassiepremosteele.com. So just my name. And there are links to Bookshop and Barnes and Noble and Amazon there. And it's also distributed through Ingram, so if you want to use your local bookstore, you can ask them to order it. It's super easy to do that. It's only $16 and it's a beautiful book.
It
It's
is.
kind of hefty and soft. And there's a contact page on the website if you want to reach out and, you know, talk to me or invite me to do a reading or whatever you'd like.
So that's interesting. You should say that. Here in Rochester, we've done some readings at Book Culture. This is this really cool bookstore out in New York City. We have one here in Pittsburgh. So if you're ever coming this way, let me know.
Okay, great. Yes, I
Because
will be doing touring this year for Beaver Girl, so we should be in touch.
so much, Cassie.
Thank you. Have a great day, and I really enjoyed this, Kelly. Thank you.
Thank you.